Good morning, good morning. Happy Wednesday, happy Wellness Wednesday. I'm running just a couple of minutes late this morning, so I hope I haven't missed you. I'm sure I haven't. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I am a mom, a nana, a wellness advocate, a grad school student studying for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling, not a counselor yet. A fitness junkie, sort of, not really a junkie, but the reason that you usually get a ponytail out of me is because I'm either coming from or going to a workout when I am done, or when I get started. So, and I started Wellness Wednesday because I thought it was important to share the stories of how I have battled anxiety and depression throughout most of my life, with the real battle beginning once I accepted that it was something that had to be addressed and not just a part of my personality. So I love to learn. I love it when followers send me topics that I can research and share, and tell stories about if I have one that's applicable. And I'm looking forward to sharing some stories with you today about why you should share yours. So if you're here, let me know you're here. If you don't see this till afterwards, drop a comment, ask a question, hit hashtag replay, whatever in the comments to let me know that you saw it. Last week, we did a Valentine's Day episode, and I hope that you are still celebrating. If you saw it, one of the items I challenged you on was to remember to just smile and say thank you if someone complimented you. So I want to know if you did that. If you did that, drop it in the comments. Let me know. That was my challenge from last week. And if you didn't see that video, let me know and I will tag you in it. I'll also drop the link in the comments of this one when I'm done so that you can take a look at last week's, and see what you can learn from how to love yourself every day instead of just Valentine's Day. So, in that video, I had mentioned something that I might follow up on, but I was so overcome with today's topic when it hit me that I decided to do this one instead for today. So, in the very near future, we're going to talk a little bit about behavior and how an exercise that we can do probably next week, about what we can control and what we can't control. Good morning, Miss Carla. But today, this topic, like I said, it kind of hit me out of nowhere. And it was so overwhelming that I just knew it was something I needed to be talking about today. And then ironically, a post came up in my memories that kind of seemed to be a really good example of what I'm going to be talking about today. So, so I decided to go with this topic about why you should tell your story, why it's important to tell your story. In October, I did a video about World Mental Health Day. And that video began stating that everybody has two stories. We have our real story, and then we have the story that we tell ourselves or sometimes tell other people. And we kind of dug into that second one a couple of different times. In fact, just recently, and I can't remember which video it was, I talked about the story we tell ourselves and how sometimes that's the negative story that keeps the negative self-talk going. But in this case, today I want to dig a little bit more into the first story, which is the real one. So we're going to talk about stories for a minute, and I'm going to ask you to be patient with me because there really is a point here. If if your eyes start to roll back in your head because you're like, I've heard this already, remember two things. There's always a point, right? And the second thing to remember is that sometimes, I know for me, I had to hear the same things over and over and over again from different sources, read them over and over again, see them over and over again before things finally started to click for me. So sometimes it's that 8 billion and one, did I say that right? I don't think I said that right. That 8 billion and one, we're just going to make it up, time that the light bulb goes on and we go, oh, that makes sense. Maybe that's what I should have been doing or should be doing or whatever the case may be. So kind of what started this thought process. And again, frequently, in fact, I just posted the other day, my joke is that sometimes getting ready to go somewhere, taking a shower, blow drying my hair, heats up my brain and really gets the thought processes going, because I'm doing schoolwork all the time. So sometimes any kind of other brain processing I'm doing just kind of gets shoved to the side and operates in the background like an update, like a Windows update. before it finally makes it to the surface. So what started me thinking about this was the book Unstoppable. For if you don't know, I am in the second book. There are 3 volumes. One is dropping today. And a friend of mine who's in the same business that I am, she's also in grad school as well, I believe. She is in the 3rd volume that is coming out today. This is the 2nd volume, and I am in it. And these are best-selling books. So that's what got me thinking about it. She had posted about how her chapter in Unstoppable 3 was coming out today. It got me thinking, because I was in number 2, and it was really difficult. As many times, good morning, Danielle, as many times as I've told pieces of my story. And some people, they have one really just poignant story that just really blows your mind. But most people have little stories all through their lives that make up the big picture. And that's the case for me. So writing the chapter in Unstoppable 2 was really, really hard for me. Number 1, not because I'm a bad writer, but because I don't always do well with structured writing. And also because I have a hard time edifying myself. And that's essentially when you're trying to write a story that in writing that to inspire others, using your experiences, it's really hard sometimes to edify yourself, especially if you've been known to be in that negative thought pattern, that negative self-talk. You start to think, why would anybody want to hear from me? Why would anybody want to know about this? Not only that, but it's hard to condense all those stories, or a Reader's Digest condensed version, if you will, that's showing my age, of those stories into a small chapter of like 5,000 words. So kudos to Celeste, who is in volume 3. But it was difficult. So that started this thought process. And then something else, I think that was about Monday, what's today? Wednesday? Yeah, it was Monday. So then in addition to that, I went to Jazzercise on Monday, and I've been really trying hard to double down, on Jazzercise, because I don't get there as often as I would like, but I want to see the changes that Jazzercise can do for my body. And I love it, and the ladies are fabulous. So I've been trying to do 2 classes in a row when I do go, so that even though I'm not going as often, I'm getting more exercise. And so I'm in the 2nd class, and we're doing ab exercises, and it's, again, the 2nd class, and I feel like I'm dying. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna die. It's like, and I'm laying on the mat, and I'm doing these ab exercises and these inner thigh exercises, and I'm starting to cry. And I'm thanking God that I'm pretty sure nobody else can see me. Some of it was the song that was on at the time. Very inspirational to me. And some of it is, it's an internal battle. It's an ongoing internal battle when you know you can do something, but you want to quit because it's hard. And that's what was happening to me in that class. I was in the 2nd class. My muscles were tired. I wasn't crying because I was in pain. And it's not like I was wailing. Nobody else knew, but I could tell I was starting to. It was a combination, good morning, Miss Susan, of the song that was on and the fact that my body wanted to quit, and I was having an internal battle, and I was telling it, you cannot quit. These people are watching. You have to keep going. You're not going to get better. You're not going to get stronger if you don't. So that's that internal battle that I think a lot of us experience on a lot of different topics, not just working out or strength or anything like that, but that constant internal struggle where we want to quit because it's getting hard. And we have to tell ourselves that it's not an option. And that's what was happening to me that day. So I started to post about that. I started to do a post about that. But I got about halfway through the text and I deleted it. And I was like, no, I don't know how to explain this. I don't know who wants to hear this. So take what I just said about Unstoppable and what I just said about Jazzercise and just sit on that and marinate in it for just a minute, because I'm getting somewhere. So the reason that we tell stories, and the reason that maybe I should have posted that on Monday, is because those things, while we may be struggling, if they're framed correctly, they can not only voice our struggle, but they can maybe help somebody else through theirs. So a lot of times, again, depending on how you frame it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute too, I post stories about what I'm going through, and I frame them in a way that it's not like airing my dirty laundry. It's not telling you specifically about the nitty gritty about a problem I'm having, or who that problem might be with. I post those because it helps me frame it in a way that it might actually help somebody else and it might inspire somebody else. And that works. Sometimes my posts about jazzercise inspire somebody else to go give it a try or to get out there for that run. I have been posting a little bit about being back in school, and the challenges, and framing it in a way that it's kind of funny, and it's just kind of like, hey, this is my life, this is what I chose. And I found out recently, a friend of mine, in a conversation, I found out recently that she has decided to go back to school for her Bachelor of Science because she was inspired by me and the fact that I'm going for my master's. So that's huge. That's absolutely huge. And then there's other stories. When you think about other stories, I have someone very, very close to me that recently, for the first time, kind of told her part of her story, a part of her story on Facebook. And I'm not 100% sure what prompted it. She and I had talked before about the importance of, when she gets to that point, telling part of her story. It's a story of abuse. It's a story of relationship abuse. And it's a scary story. And not too long ago, I was blown away by a Facebook post where she told part of that story. She talked about how easy it was to use social media to hide what's really going on in our lives, kind of like a highlight reel. When some of her memories that popped up were happening on a day where she was having a gun held to her head. And that's only a tiny piece of the story, but she framed it in a way to say that there's hope, and to say that, that we need to understand that not everything we see that looks like a highlight reel on Facebook is the truth. Well, not that it's not the truth, but it's not the whole story, and that we never really know what somebody is experiencing it. So that's powerful. But more importantly, what do you think happened when other people that didn't know that read it? People that knew her but didn't know all those details. And what about people who may have been experiencing something like that themselves, or maybe just in that moment that they read it, they were experiencing something similar, and possibly her sharing that little piece of her story inspired them to make a change, to feel a little stronger, whatever the case, to reach out to somebody, maybe to tell somebody for the first time what's been going on. So these things are really important. And then I have a mentor who was badly abused as a child. And he has harnessed that and used that to turn it into inspiring people to do what they want to do, start their own business, get into real estate, whatever, because he is proof that that kind of childhood doesn't mean that that you can't do anything for the rest of your life, and that you can come back from a low rock bottom self-esteem and achieve amazing things. Kind of like my story. Of course, the chapter in the book is only a tiny piece of my story, but if you were to go by standard statistics, some of the things that I experienced growing up were like a recipe, according to some experts, for never going anywhere in my life, and maybe, being somewhere in a rat hole, having babies, or maybe being in jail or having a criminal record, but that's not what happened. So the point is that these stories are important. They're important because when you get to a point where you can tell your story, you might just be inspiring somebody else that's where you were at that time, and that doesn't know how to move, or how to move forward, or zigzag to get out of their situation, or whatever the case may be. And that's why these stories are important. Faith is another one. I don't touch on it a lot on Wellness Wednesday because I try to be careful. Everybody has different beliefs. I have a tendency to take more of a spiritual approach, which you can apply to whatever your faith is. I have no problem professing that I believe in God, but not everybody does. Other people have different beliefs, but a lot of that talk helps them to lean into whatever that belief or faith is. And so probably once every couple of weeks, I'll post something that has something to do with something spectacular that's happened in my life that I can attribute to my God and my faith. And NAMI, I work for NAMI. Not everybody knows that. I'm part-time remote for NAMI Citrus, which is a local affiliate of NAMI National. Now, if you don't know what NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And of course, it dovetails beautifully with me working on my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. But NAMI uses stories. NAMI uses stories of people that have battled and begun to overcome mental illness or substance abuse or something of that nature. They use those stories. They use them on their Facebook page. We share them on the NAMI Citrus page. They use them in their newsletters. Stories of other people's experiences are what give people that are battling that hope. And NAMI uses stories on a local level with support groups. That is what peer wisdom is. When you seek help from a support group or a 12-step program, you are seeking peer wisdom. That is what's happening there. And those are based on those people's stories. Maybe they did something that worked for them that you never thought of. Might work for you, might not. But if you never thought of it, you never heard of it, you would have never considered it, right? So stories are really important, and that's why I started Wellness Wednesday, because the whole idea was to learn and share, for me to share stories, something salient that I think might help somebody else, and for you to be like, you know what, I've experienced that too. And that's why I always encourage you to comment and post. So the point here is that stories are really important. The one that I posted, we'll get there in a minute. So why should we tell our stories? If you haven't already figured that out, why should we tell our stories? Well, it changes our beliefs of the situation. Whatever it was, whether the event was 20 years ago or 2 days ago or 20 hours ago, it changes our beliefs. And what I mean by that is when the event first happens, we may believe a certain thing about that event. We may believe that we were completely in the wrong, or that it was totally out of our control, or whatever the case may be. In my case, a lot of what I believed as I was growing up was that I was wired wrong. In fact, my chapter in this book kind of starts out that way, that I always felt odd. I always felt like I was wired wrong, that I always felt like I was a bad kid. And as I have gotten older and I've rehearsed that story in my head and thought about that story and shared that story with others, I have come to realize I was just a kid. I wasn't a bad kid. I was a kid that was in some bad situations, and the people around me weren't necessarily responding or reacting in the right ways, right? And there were some things that were going on. Most people didn't know until a couple years ago that I spent time in foster care. I spent most of my teenage years in foster care. It wasn't because I was a bad kid. It was because there were things going on that never everybody understood, but a lot of times there were things that were said and reactions that made me feel like those were my problem, even at the age of 6 or 7. And so I began to internalize and personalize all of this, thinking that it was all me and that my perspective was wrong and skewed. And that carried on into my adult life. Some people, when they are attacked, when they're sexually abused, when anything like that happens, they have a tendency to personalize, and sometimes the people around them personalize. They look at a situation like that and they have a tendency to be like, well, I should have done this different, and I shouldn't have done that, and I should have, and they should have themselves to death, when in fact, it may have been perfectly random. They may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the way they view the event is often through a personalizing lens. And so as the story is told and retold, new information comes to light. For example, I had what I refer to as a talking Tom in an apartment that I lived in several years ago. My blinds were frequently shut, but I would often hear at night, I would hear this monotone sound. It sounded like somebody was talking, but quickly and low, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. And one night after my daughter had gone to bed, I was on the couch watching TV, and I heard this happening outside my window, and I started to very slowly turn the volume down. And at that point, I became very aware of the words and what was being said. And this individual was doing whatever they were doing outside of my window. They couldn't see me, but they were getting excited about doing whatever they were doing outside of my window and getting away with it. And I could hear the words. And I immediately, never had anything like this happen to me before, but immediately turned very red and felt myself getting very warm with embarrassment. And I started sinking down into my couch, even though I understood he couldn't see me. And then when I couldn't take it anymore and I heard some pretty crude words, I started to get really scared. And I got up and I grabbed my phone and I flipped on the outside light and it stopped. And I had heard this low monologue, this low voice happening before outside my bedroom window when I was reading at night. This is not the first time I'd heard it. But it was scary, and I was scared for days and weeks thinking that this person was targeting me, and found out with some help from some neighbors that were very astute and paying attention, and some colleagues who not only threatened to sit on the roof with a baseball bat and wait for this person to come back, but also equipped my entire apartment with motion floodlights. Over a period of a few weeks, we learned who the person was. And we also learned, because of this telling of the story, the retelling of the story, we also, and neighbors that heard the story and started paying closer attention, we also learned that the person that was doing it was also doing it to other people in the apartment. So it took away that personalization. Do you see what I'm talking about? It took away that personalization so that I no longer felt like I was specifically targeted. And it changed my belief about the event. Was it still scary? Absolutely. Did it make me start locking my doors at night, which I should have been doing anyway? Absolutely. Did it make me start keeping lights on and stuff like that? Did it make me more aware? Yes. So it was a lesson for me, but it also, that time, that telling of the story to the neighbor and retelling to another neighbor, which led to a neighbor seeing this person outside my door when the floodlight went off, and being able to see that person walk away and identify them later, is what led to a change in the way the event was viewed, a change in the way the events went down, how it was viewed, and how personal or targeted that I felt. So it made a difference. So that's part of why we should tell our stories, is it sometimes changes our belief about the situation. We may be starting with an erroneous belief that helped us adapt to whatever happened at the time. And instead, as we tell the story, we learn to understand that maybe whatever the event was really didn't have anything to do with us. Or maybe we do learn that we could have done something different, or we could have reacted differently. So those stories are important for changing beliefs and keeping you from personalizing things. So 70% of what we learn is through stories. This came from a leadership communication site. 70% of what we learn is through stories that we read, that we listen to, that we hear from other people. Good morning, Melissa. That is amazing. 70%. And I could go into all kinds of scientific stuff about operant conditioning and learning social modeling behavior. We're just not going to go there right now. That's the geek in me. We're not going to do too much geek today. You might not know your story as well as you think. The more you tell it, the more sense you can make of it, especially as you evolve and change over time. The more shame you can reduce. That my Talking Tom incident is a perfect example. Initially, when that first happened, I was ashamed. I was immediately ashamed. It was my guttural reaction. I was immediately ashamed and immediately thinking I was in trouble. I was doing something wrong. What did I do? That's right where it went. I was embarrassed. I was disgusted. I was... and I somehow thought it was my fault, which is part of that initial reaction, that blushing and that heating up and that sinking down into my couch, like, what is happening here? And so again, the more you tell it, the more sense you can make of who you are, and the more you can reduce shame, and the easier it becomes to talk about it. As I said, up until a few years ago, most of the people, even the people closest to me, really didn't know that I was in foster care. I didn't talk about it. I didn't start talking about it until friends started taking in foster children. And I realized how grateful I was to them for that, because I was a foster child at one point. So like I said, as you grow and evolve and as you tell your stories, sometimes I remember things that I didn't remember before. Sometimes I remember new components. I have very little memory of my childhood. And sometimes I pick up new memories as I tell the story or retell pieces of the story. So, telling stories, listening to stories, telling your story, it helps you make connections. It's relatable. We oftentimes think that we're alone until we hear or see a story from somebody else that's experiencing something similar. And when we see it or we hear it, we're like, oh my gosh, I know how that feels. I know exactly what she's talking about. I didn't think anybody else would ever understand. So those stories, they help us find connections. They help us be relatable. And by being relatable, we may be helping other people. And they show that we're human. This particular one that I posted that came up in my memories actually was a few days after my grandmother died. And the post doesn't say anything about my grandmother dying. It says, meet Have To Donna. Some of you have met her before or not known it. And it talks about how sometimes you fill yourself up with these have tos. You have to do this, you have to do that. And sometimes an incident happens that needs to be dealt with, that you need to go off in a corner and cry or grieve or react to or whatever. And you can't, because you've got yourself filled up with these have tos. But sometimes that needs to be a have to. And you have to stop and you have to take that break and deal or grieve or whatever. And that's essentially what was happening. Was there was a major event going on at work around the time that my grandmother died. And I was the only staff person. So I could not leave. I didn't feel like I could leave. So I had to kind of muscle through it. And so that's what that whole post was about. But in that entire time of that post, only the people that knew that my grandmother passed knew that that's what it was about. That's the only, because I was able to take it and reframe it in a way where I could kind of get it off my chest, if you will, but in a way that would be inspirational and helpful for somebody else. But it helps people to understand that you are human. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with your Facebook page being a bunch of highlight reels, or your social media platform, whatever that is. But if you can tell your story in a way that inspires others, then that's something, that's a gift. That's absolutely a gift. So how, like I said, how can we know that we're not alone or that we're not strange if we've not heard someone else's experience? So your experience may feel unique to you, and it is unique to you. And but somebody else out there might be having something similar, and when they hear your story or read it, it might be a light bulb. It might be a huge light bulb. I know it's happened to me on numerous occasions, and from feedback I've gotten, it's probably happened to a couple other people too. So healing. I have a friend who's a grief coach. She happens to be in the first volume of Unstoppable. It's amazing the circles that you find yourself in when you take risks, right? And she has turned her story of loss, the loss of her son, into a grief coaching business that gives her pleasure and helps her heal and gives her purpose beyond what she ever imagined. So if you've recently lost a loved one and you don't think that you can move forward from that, hearing a story like hers might actually give you purpose too, and some healing. So that's why these kind of stories are important. Good morning, Miss Kayla. I'm wrapping up, so hopefully you'll go back to the beginning and watch, because I think you'll find some interesting things in here. So there's a famous quote by David M. Watts that says, when you can tell your story and it doesn't make you cry, that's when you know you've healed. And I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, because sometimes now when I tell my stories, I still cry. But I cry because I'm proud of myself. I'm proud of myself. Here we go. For muscling through. I'm proud of myself when I look at where I am now versus where I am then. Because some of those stories are just stories about bad choices. They're stories about bad choices and bad predicaments that I put myself into. And when I see where I was versus where I am now, that's where those tears come from. So I don't know that not crying necessarily means you've healed, because I have healed and I still cry sometimes because I see what has happened and what has resulted from my listening to stories and my hearing stories and my telling my own and getting through it. So these are really important things. And you don't want to go too far with it. So again, like I mentioned with this post about my grandmother, this isn't airing dirty laundry. I could have gotten on Facebook. I was in a bad place, y'all. I could have gotten on Facebook and just blasted my job for not having another employee and not being able to leave, and you know what I mean? And that wasn't the case. I could have left. I could have gotten up and left. They would have been in a hell of a situation, but I could have gotten up and left. Okay? But so that's not what we're talking about here. When we're talking about you know, and this person close to me that I talked about who spoke of, you know, a time, the post that she was making on Facebook, you know, over a time that she was being abused and having a gun held to her head. She could have gotten on there and blasted that individual, but that's not really helpful, is it? She framed her story in a way that it hopefully, and I have no doubt inspired, I have it here in front of me. I have no doubt inspired someone else that was feeling oppressed or abused to maybe make a move at that time. So that is the point here. It's not dirty laundry. It's not about airing dirty laundry, but it is about, if you have a story and it's in your heart to share it in a way, there's a reason it's in your heart to share it. Share it in a way that might inspire others. And that's, again, the whole point here. So there's also a famous quote from best-selling author Erin Morgenstern that says this: "You may tell a tale that takes up residence in someone's soul, becomes their blood and self and purpose. That tale will move them and drive them, and who knows what they might do because of it, because of your words. That is your role. That is your gift." What? That's mind-blowing. Okay, here we go again. Sorry, guys. But it's true. It's absolutely true. Everyone has a story. Some people have many little stories that make up a big one. Others have one major incident, event, trauma, whatever. I tell stories about how I met a major sponsor for a work event and embarrassed the hell out of myself. Why do I tell the story? Well, now he's recently passed, so I tell it in memory of him. I tell him because it became a very funny joke in our circle once we got through the initial embarrassment. And I also tell it to prove that you can embarrass yourself and recover from it without any major events happening afterwards as repercussion. So remember that. I'm going to say it again. You may tell a tale that takes up residence in someone's soul, becomes their blood and self and purpose. That tale will move them and drive them, and who knows what they might do because of it, because of your words. That is your role. That is your gift. So if you have a story to tell, see if you are there. See if you are to the point where you can tell that story enough in a way, even if it's just a tiny piece of it, in a way that can help somebody else. Like this one. I'm not going to read her post, but she talks about keeping an extra phone charged and hidden away because he would take hers and take her keys so that she couldn't go anywhere, so that she was stranded and isolated. And she talks about how she justified it and convinced herself that it wasn't abuse because she wasn't covered in bruises, so it could be worse. That's a strong message. And I'm so stinking proud of her for speaking up and for telling that little piece of her story, because I know it was hard. I know that every time she tells me a piece of that story, I get emotional all over again. But it's important, and it's important that her story be heard because it might help somebody else. Just like it's important to understand that sometimes you have to muscle through things, and that if you have to go into a corner and cry and scream because you suffered a loss and there's too much going on around you to even properly grieve it, that's okay. You're human. And that if you embarrass yourself in front of an important person, that you can recover from that. That's what these stories are about. I know you have a story. So if you're ready, when you're ready, Tell that story, because you never, ever, ever know who you might be inspiring. That's all I have for today. Okay, so if you found this helpful, please share it. If you think that somebody's got a story to tell, or you can send it to them in Messenger if you don't want to single them out. You can tag them in the comments, or you can just share it and hope that they'll see it. So as always, if you found this helpful, share it. If you would like a signed copy of NAMI 2, I was thinking about NAMI. Okay, so if you would like a signed copy of Volume 2, Volume 3 is launching today, and I'm not in that one, but there's some amazing, amazing women in all 3 volumes. This is Volume 2. If you would like a personally signed copy of Volume 2, I am selling them. You can message me. I'm not going to get into grave details, but what I will tell you is all proceeds after the cost of the book and shipping. Oh my goodness. After the cost of the book and shipping are going to NAMI Citrus. I've been using this as a fundraiser for NAMI Citrus. I haven't been promoting it that much lately, but that's what I'm doing with it. And next week, we're going to do that behavior exercise that I talked about last week to help us determine what we can control. And what's actually a behavior we can control and what is not. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please share. Thank you, Miss Carla. You are also brave and inspirational. I know you already inspired me more than once. So tell your story. Tell your story. Okay, I'm going to start crying again, so I'm going to get off of here. But like I said, if you found it helpful, please share. I hope that you found something in here that motivates you, that drives you, and that helps you toward your purpose, whatever that is. All right. I love you all. Have a fabulous Wednesday. If you have a topic you'd like to see me cover, please send me a message, drop a comment. As long as it's not politics or negativity, I got you. We'll find a way to work it in. All right. Have a fabulous Wednesday and be well.